Welcome to Recap King. In this video, we will explain the King of the Streets. This movie tells the story of a brutal street fight sent to prison for 8 years. Upon his release, he works to fit back into society, but his dark past keeps haunting him. Can he come out of the shadows of the past? Let's find out in The King of the Streets. The King of the Streets begins when a 16-year-old boy named Feng visits a group of thugs. Feng is a young delinquent who likes to fight. Even so, he was known to have excellent fighting skills, thanks to his reputation as a street fighter. Because of that ability, he was quite able to withstand the attacks of the gang of thugs who had wanted to take revenge on Ahai, his friend. But since Ahai's whereabouts is unknown, the gang of thugs end up targeting Feng. After being involved in a fierce battle that was unequal in number, Feng was finally cornered and beaten by the gang of thugs, until in the end, the head of the thugs came and beat him. The scene then switches to showing Feng, who has been released from prison after languishing there for so long. Feng then visited a friend named Sopo. The man seemed pleased to meet Feng and asked him to stay at his house for a while, but Sopo's wife doesn't agree with Feng being in their house. Feeling bad, Feng finally left Sopo's house and walked down the street without knowing where to go. As night fell, Feng decided to sleep in an abandoned building. The next day, he started his day by practicing martial arts. After that, he tried to find a job to make a living, but he got rejected because he just got out of prison. The scene then switches to showing a girl named Liu who is chasing pickpockets on a bicycle, until they finally arrive at a deserted place. Since Liu was alone, the pickpockets tried to seduce her, but Liu put up a little resistance because it turned out that she was quite good at martial arts. But in the end she was hit from behind and was knocked unconscious. Upon awakening, Liu was very surprised to have Feng by her side. Liu had time to ask who Feng was and what he was doing there, but Feng didn't answer and left immediately. It turned out that Feng had defeated all the pickpockets and helped Liu. One time, two men named Bob and Bobo were seen lifting a long sofa using a rope. They both looked troubled because of the heavy load of the sofa. Not long after, a boy was seen who wanted to take the ball which was right under the chair. At the same time, the rope used to lift the chair suddenly broke, and the large sofa fell and almost fell on the boy. Luckily, Feng saved him in time. Feng's heroic deeds were praised by Bob and Bobo's boss, who saw the incident. He then tries to apply for jobs. Seeing Feng's agility, the boss accepted him and allowed him to stay in the warehouse for a while. After getting a job and a place to live, Feng continues to practice martial arts to improve his skills while remembering his dark past. The next day, while at work, Bob and Bobo tell about a legendary street fighter who is predicted to have extraordinary fighting abilities. Bob then tells Feng that Bobo is related to Feng Yue, the legendary fighter. Bobo lauds Feng Yue's abilities, which he says exceeds Bruce Lee and Mike Tyson, because at the age of 16, he managed to beat 20 people alone and kill someone. However, Bob and Bobo did not know that the Feng Yue they were cheering for was Feng, who was standing in front of them. Hearing Bruce Lee's name, Feng remembered what Ahai said when they were training together, where he had also said that his martial arts abilities could exceed Bruce Lee's if he practiced diligently. Elsewhere, Sopo plays the harmonica while reminiscing about his childhood playing with Feng and Ahai. One day, Feng and the others got an assignment from the boss to deliver some used computers to an orphanage owned by Mr. Zhao. While moving the computer into the room, Bob accidentally dropped one of the computers. Not wanting to be blamed, Bob and Bobo finally put it back in the box and told Feng to move the item. Bob and Bobo scolded Feng and accused him when the computer crashed again. Feng then meets Liu, who turns out to be a volunteer at the orphanage. As an expression of gratitude for helping her, Liu then treated Feng to a meal at a restaurant. While chatting with Liu, Feng got a call from Bob asking for his help to get somewhere as soon as he was in a hurry. Before leaving, Feng and Liu exchanged phone numbers to get in touch. Elsewhere, Bob and Bobo turn out to be having problems with a thug because they have a debt to the thug. Feng finally arrived at the thug's place. However, because Feng did not bring any money, the thug got angry and hit him on the head with a bottle of alcohol. Unexpectedly, Feng didn't budge in the slightest and instead beat up the thug. Feng then broke a bottle of alcohol with his hands in front of the thug, making the thug even more helpless for fear of his power. As he was about to sleep, Feng recalled the incident that was carried out by a gang of thugs several years ago. At that time, Feng, who had been cornered, was able to rise up and fight them all. However, Feng goes crazy and accidentally kills the head of the thugs, causing him to be in prison. During his sentence, he reflected on his wrongdoing and all the bad actions, including the violence he had committed. He was determined to change the course of his life to be a better person after being released from prison. A few days later, Feng was seen helping Liu volunteer at Mr. Zhao's orphanage. A boy approached Feng and gave him a picture. Feng was reminded of his childhood memories with his father by seeing the picture. He misses his father very much, but they have long been at odds because he prefers to spend his time fighting in the streets, which his father strongly opposes. Feng never visited his father again because he had let his father down. Not long after, a gang of thugs, led by a man named Alun, visited the orphanage on a company's orders. They forced Mr. Zhao to sell his land to the company, but Mr. Zhao immediately refused because on the land, an orphanage had been built, and the company offered a very low price. Because Mr. Zhao refused, the goons then threatened him and left from there. After that, Feng finally meets his old friend, Ahai, who is now a great street fighter. Ahai invites Feng to work with him to become a hired fighter for the gangsters, but Feng refused because now he was determined to change for the better. Feng then advised Ahai to quit his profession. However, both Feng and Ahai have considered each other like brothers, and respected each other's decisions. When he was about to take a taxi home, Feng was surprised that the taxi driver was his father. But, upon seeing Feng, the father immediately stepped on the gas and left him. The next day, Feng bought street food sold by an old woman. Not long after, 2 police officers came to the old woman and chased her away because she was forbidden to sell on the street. Seeing this, Feng tried to bribe the 2 policemen not to chase her away and confiscate the woman's merchandise. Feng did this because he felt guilty for killing her grandson. Long story short, Alun reported to his boss, Mr. Li, if Mr. Zhao was unwilling to sell his land. Mr. Li then gave a 1-week deadline to sort things out, no matter what. Alun and his men start to wreak havoc in the orphanage. Because Mr. Zhao and Liu could not fight them, Feng finally intervened to beat Alun and his henchmen and chase them away. After that, when Feng and Liu were on their way home after shopping for the children's needs at the orphanage, they were again ambushed by a group of thugs carrying sharp weapons. Feng knocked Liu out first and protected her before beating up the gang of armed thugs. Again, he could easily defeat the thugs. Even he managed to thwart the kidnapping of one of the orphanage children by thugs. The next day, while Liu was teaching at the orphanage, Mr. Li and his henchmen visited the orphanage to force Mr. Zhao to sell his land. But Mr. Zhao was adamant that he would not sell his land, much less to Mr. Li is famous for being cunning and cruel. When one of Mr. Li was about to hurt Mr. Zhao, Feng came and kicked him straight away. Mr. Li then breaks up the imminent fight and tells Feng to settle the matter by fighting. If Feng got it right, then he would not bother Mr. Zhao and the land again. Feng agreed. After leaving the orphanage, Mr. Li tells Alun to find the greatest street fighter to face Feng. On the other hand, Mr. Zhao advised Feng not to always solve problems by fighting. When Liu takes Feng off, they tell each other about each other's past, where Liu feels very guilty when she learns that a child has been orphaned by their father's actions. She then decides to volunteer at an orphanage and help orphan children. Feng also recounted his past where he had killed people and ended up in prison, but now he is determined to become a better human being. Feng finally arrived at the appointed place to do battle with the street fighters chosen by Mr. Li. After signing the agreement, Feng immediately confronted the first fighter, where he could easily overthrow the fighter with a few light strikes. But it turns out Mr. Li had prepared another fighter to fight him. However, the fighters were not a match for Feng, as he didn't take long to defeat them all. Until in the end, came the third fighter who was none other than his best friend, Ahai. Feng tries to convince Ahai not to continue the fight, but they have no other choice. When Ahai was on the offensive, Feng simply parried and dodged it. Feng just stood still as Ahai punched him in the face. The two then recalled the past when they were practicing together. Ahai finally came to his senses and stopped the fight. He went to Mr. Li and said that he would not continue the fight with Feng, but Mr. Li, who was not happy with Ahai's decision, then broke his hand. Seeing this, Feng was ready to avenge Mr. Li to his best friend, but Ahai stopped him, and they both left the place. After the fight, Feng thought he would only bring havoc to those around him. For this reason, he decided to stay away from everyone, including Liu and the children at the orphanage. On the other hand, the thugs ordered by Mr. Li were even more daring to attack those closest to Feng, such as the father and the old woman selling fried foods. Luckily, both of them only received minor injuries. Feng then received a call from Liu informing him that Mr. Zhao has been kidnapped by Mr. Li. Because he was fed up with the oppression and cruelty of Mr. Li and his henchmen, Feng decided to take revenge. Bravely, Feng went to Mr. Li and confronted his minions alone. Feng didn't take long to crush them all. He wasn't even hurt when he faced Alun, who attacked him with a sharp weapon. After successfully defeating Mr. Li's henchmen, Feng rushed to save Mr. Zhao. Unexpectedly, it turns out that Mr. Li was already waiting for Feng to be there and prepared to kill him with a gun. However, when Mr. Li shot a bullet at him, he still stands still, as if the bullet had no effect on him. After that, he then killed Mr. Li with one hit. Seeing Mr. Li, who was lying lifeless, Feng suddenly collapsed unconscious. A few days later, Feng finally woke up after undergoing intensive treatment at the hospital due to the gunshot wound he suffered. After returning from the hospital, Feng, who has now reconciled with his father, returns home and lives with him. The film ends by showing Feng carrying a bunch of flowers and gifts and meeting Liu because it was her birthday. There was a gunshot and Feng suddenly collapsed. After that, there was a moment of togetherness between Feng and Liu. The film ends.